the button. There's the button. Okay, great. Thanks, everybody, for coming tonight. We're particularly thrilled to have Jack Ahern here and all of his students from UMass Amherst to look at the question of resiliency. And Jack and I were just talking a few minutes ago about how timely this is. Timely against what we just saw in Florida, timely against the flooding we're seeing, timely against some of the reports we've seen on sea level rise. And whether or not you believe that there's one cause or another cause, I think everybody here in the room knows that we're seeing sea level rise and the change is happening. It seems to be happening at a fairly rapid clip. I think what you want to know about this presentation and what I'm excited about, and we've done this once before looking at water quality, and we had an interesting comment from some people in the room, and a couple of residents that I know that we all would know who've been around for a long time said, gee, the students don't know you can't do that. And I said, you know what, that's exactly the kind of thing that we need to hear, and I think that's what we're going to hear now. So this isn't necessarily a picture of what the future has to look like, but it's some options. Optionality, really, I've called it kind of an idea palette. Things that you could look at, things that have potential, things that need to be thought about, and that unfortunately we would think about if we had a Hurricane Sandy, if we had an event like that, we'd really have to think differently. So without further ado, I want to say thank you very much for everybody's time tonight, and thanks very much to Jack, and thanks especially to all the students that are here for all the hard work that you did, and we really, really appreciate it. And thanks to Elizabeth Jenkins for taking time out of your Saturday to come travel around with us and visit some of these locations. That was great. So I don't know who's going to go first, Jack, or what the program is. Okay, you're up. Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks, Z. So good evening, everyone. My name is Tia Novak. My colleagues and I are third-year landscape architecture graduate students at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. And for the past 7 weeks, we have been working on proposals for 4 sites across the town of Barnstable. Our work was sponsored by the Barnstable Clean Water Coalition and the town of Barnstable in hopes of developing some sustainable strategies to make Barnstable a more resilient coastal community. So as some of you may already know, the town of Barnstable is the largest town on Cape Cod. It has 2 coastlines. One is on the Cape Cod Bay and the other is on the Nantucket Sound. And these 2 coastlines make Barnstable extremely vulnerable to the effects of sea level rise and make coastal resiliency even more urgent for the town of Barnstable. When we discuss coastal resiliency, we're referring to the capacity of a community to recover from disturbance in an efficient and timely manner, and also the ability of that community to adapt to the effects of climate change. And these include sea level rise, storm surge, flooding, and sudden erosion events. Coastal resiliency is extremely important in Barnstable because Barnstable has 170 miles of coastline, which puts much of Barnstable's community and infrastructure at risk to the effects of climate change. We know that the sea level is rising. We know that storm events are going to increase in frequency and intensity, and we know that these storm events have happened in the past. Here's a photo of a sign that shows the flooding levels of Hurricane Bob at Stewart's Creek. And this was about 5.5 feet of sea level rise. So we can imagine that this is a hurricane event, a singular event, and that combined with sea level rise in the future, these events can cause even more damage to Barnstable, which is why coastal resiliency is a proactive approach to climate change that the town needs. 2 of the terms we'll use to discuss risk when we're talking about coastal resiliency are exposure and vulnerability. Exposure refers to places and people that are exposed to different levels of vulnerability, which refers to their sensitivity and susceptibility to disturbance events, and also their ability to cope with or adapt to these disturbance events. So these 2 images both show equally exposed areas. They're both beaches, but one has more assets and infrastructure on it, and that's the picture on the right with the home. So although these are 2 beaches that are equally exposed, the one on the right is more developed, there's more impervious surface, there's more investment in this area, and therefore it's more vulnerable to coastal hazards. Some of our project goals include enhancing resiliency and adaptability in Barnstable. We also want to improve exposure and vulnerability awareness in the town of Barnstable. And we're hoping to explore possible design interventions in 4 sites across the town of Barnstable, including Blish Point, Hyannis Harbor, Stewart's Creek, and Sampson's Island. And we're hoping that some of these strategies we use at these sites will stimulate discussion in the town of Barnstable and hopefully could be a catalyst for some action to make Barnstable a more resilient coastal community. 3 strategies we're using to achieve coastal resiliency in Barnstable involve living shorelines, sheltered shorelines, and strategic retreat. Living shorelines refers to using some of the ecosystems that are already in place in the town of Barnstable. So these could be dunes or salt marshes, but the point is that these ecosystems have co-evolved with changing conditions found on Cape Cod for thousands of years, and they are best equipped to adapt to and change with climate change. We also use a sheltered shorelines approach. So sometimes a living shoreline approach is not available or appropriate. In this case, we will use a sheltered shoreline approach, which is basically a hybrid of gray and green infrastructure to protect Barnstable's shorelines. So maybe we're using not just a dune, but it's a reinforced dune. The point is that it's a little bit of a take on a conventional approach to coastal resiliency that will help protect Barnstable's shorelines. And some of our other strategies will use strategic retreat. This is a really difficult issue, and it's one of the many possibilities that the town should consider and explore. We know that strategic retreat is already occurring in towns like Hyannisport. Here's an image that was happening just last week of 2 homes being moved back from the coast. But this is an academic exercise, and strategic retreat is just one of the many possibilities that can be employed in the town of Barnstable to cope with the effects of climate change. So we're gonna go into a little background information about the site. First, Josiah is going to discuss the geomorphological processes that have and will continue to shape Cape Cod. Then we will start discussing coastal conditions, and then we'll go into future projections for sea level rise and flooding in the town of Barnstable.
Hi, I'm Josiah, and I'm here to talk to you about geomorphological processes, or geomorphology, which is essentially about how landform is shaped. And so of particular interest to this studio is coastal geomorphology, what happens along the coastline. And geomorphology is a constant process. It's what shaped the Cape from the beginning of time and will continue to do so forever. And it affects the Cape and its coastline at large and small scales across space and time. So it has big implications over long periods of time and can have big implications over short periods of time with storms. And it is what has shaped the landscape of Cape Cod. So dunes, tidal marshes, sandbars, coastal bluffs are all part of coastal geomorphological processes. And you can't understand geomorphology of the Cape without first mentioning the Laurentide Glacier, which started extending southward about 24,000 years ago, that acted basically like a giant snowplow that pushed a bunch of gravel down south, first stopping at the islands, retreating a little bit, and then stopping on Cape Cod, creating the Sandwich Moraine indicated on the right side of the slide. The black indicates where the moraine is, and what the moraine is a big pile of glacial till, sand, an unconsolidated mix of aggregates from clay to sand to boulders, which is easily manipulated by the forces of the coast. And some of the key forces that are responsible for coastal geomorphology are currents that transport material, tide that push and pull material in and out, waves that are an erosive force, and storms, which are cataclysmic events that can either subtract an immense amount of material very quickly and deposit it somewhere else where it wasn't before. And essentially, coastal geomorphology is the erosion of material and the deposition of that material somewhere else. So generally speaking, there's a few main currents around Barnstable and the Cape. There's a west to east current to the north in Cape Cod Bay, an east to west current in Nantucket Sound. There's also, obviously, you're very aware of tides, I'm sure. Two high, two low tides occur every day. Tides are influenced by the sun and the moon and their alignment to the earth. There's different types of tides depending on what quarter the moon is in and whether the sun and moon are aligned with the earth, creating very high tides, or called spring tides, or neap tides, which when the moon and sun are at a right angle to the earth. Wind is what creates waves, and this is called fetch. As wind moves over the water, the friction of the wind pushes waves upon the beach, creating an erosive force. And then the combination of waves, currents, and tides creates something called littoral drift. And littoral drift is what has created Sandy Neck and Sampson's Island, where the current meeting the shore at an oblique angle causes material to fall back into the water or be pulled back into the water at a 90-degree angle and then pushed back by the waves, creating a zigzag movement that over time can erode land masses on the upcurrent side and deposit an immense amount of material on the downcurrent side. Sand can move as much as 30 yards in a day from littoral drift. More cataclysmic events, which are a lot faster than the process of littoral drift, are storm events like hurricanes. This diagram shows all the hurricanes that have ever happened in the last 150 years. And the point of this is to show the boomerang shape that hurricanes take. Only about 3% of hurricanes hit New England. The image to the right from NOAA is an image of Hurricane Bob from 1991 and its general track. Hurricane Bob, as you all know, those of you who were here at the time, caused a lot inundated interior areas where the water usually doesn't go, and it changed the coastline in a big way. More frequent are nor'easters that tend to happen in the winter. A nor'easter is when cold, high pressure from the north meets warm, low pressure coming from the south, and the spinning movement of both those systems accelerates, creating high wind, high precipitation, and storm surge, and the direction of that counterclockwise movement can cause major flooding and major damage on the Cape. And then there's a perfect storm where spring tide or something called high tide, king tide, can correspond with high tide and a storm event, creating a cataclysmic storm or perfect storm where even the highest high tide a storm surge goes well beyond the high tide and can inundate inland areas. We try and stop geomorphological processes and thwart them through bulkheads and flood walls, revetments to stop erosion from happening and keep the beaches the same. This works for a point. As sea level rise continues, these systems become more likely to fail or be overwhelmed. As Tia mentioned, some of the strategies we've been looking at are some of those hard engineering strategies, but also living shoreline strategies like dunes and beaches, barrier islands and coastal wetlands that can adapt with the change, adapt with the rising seas, grow, and when they're disturbed, even grow back. So geomorphology is key to this studio because coastal geomorphological processes continue to happen. Understanding how they work is important for us to develop new ideas and new designs, which we'll present to you shortly. with climate change and sea level rise, we're seeing an unprecedented time where unprecedented new ideas have to be tried. And the only certainty in this uncertain time is that geomorphological processes will continue. And Mitch is going to talk to you a little bit about some of the ecological types that's partially due to geomorphology.
All right, now we're gonna take a look at the coastal landscapes found in the town of Barnstable. So Barnstable has 170 miles of coastline. So what we did is we broke it down into these different coastal typologies: salt marsh, developed salt marsh, Barry Island dune, bulkhead, beach, developed beach, and bluff, so we could better understand and manage them. Each of these coastal typologies have different levels of resiliency depending on their different types of exposures and vulnerabilities found on each site. So here's a map showing, again, our 4 focus areas chosen by the town of Barnstable. Each one has different types of coastal typologies, so each proposal will have different solutions and strategies when addressing the issues. So now we're gonna take a close look at a couple coastal typologies to better understand the different types of resiliency found at each site. So first we have the coastal beach, flat adjacent shoreline to the ocean, and it has high exposure to storm surge, sea level rise, but because there's no development along the beach, it is not vulnerable. It is actually highly resilient from its sandy dunes, along with its vegetated beach grasses that actually absorb the ocean's impact, making it a very resilient site. But as you move along to a developed beach, you have those same exposures before of storm surge, sea level rise, the ocean's impact. But now you remove the dunes, you remove the vegetated beach grasses, you bring in housing and roads. Now the site is highly vulnerable to those exposures and is severely at risk. Another coastal typology, the salt marsh. It's a flat, muddy lowland, high amount of species diversity, actually sheltered from the ocean impact. So it's more susceptible to sea level rise and flooding are the main issues. But it is a high resilience location because of its space it has, as the low and high marshes are able to actually expand and retreat into the upland spaces as flooding and sea level happen, so they can mitigate those impacts. But if you move to a developed salt marsh, now you see you're building on the uplands, like in the picture, just adjacent to the marshlands. All those same exposures, sea level rise and flooding, but now the site is highly vulnerable to those exposures, and now the salt marsh has no place to has the flooding to go, so now it goes into the dwelling, causing a lot of flooding and damage to the properties. So our assessment and takeaways is the 170 miles of coastline in Barnstable is extremely vulnerable to sea level rise, flooding, and storm surge. Next, these coastal landscapes are better understood when they're broken down into these coastal typologies. And then each typology has a different type of resiliency depending on their exposures and vulnerability found on the site. And then finally, understanding these typologies and their various types of resiliency can help make us make more informed decisions as policymakers and designers, so we can have more coastal resilient communities to adapt to sea level rise and coastal storm hazards. So now Ben is going to take it away with sea level rise and the vulnerabilities for Barnstable.
Alrighty, so there we go. So I'm going to talk about an overview of climate change impacts, localized sea level rise projections for the town of Barnstable, and then take a close look at some of the vulnerabilities found in the town of Barnstable due to climate change and sea level rise. And so just brief overview of what causes the sea level to rise. It's a very complex issue, affected by many different dynamic forces, but mostly when we think of sea level rise, we talk about the melting of the glaciers, thermal expansion, which is actually the seawater itself expanding due to the increased ocean temperatures. And then the third factor is land subsidence, and this is especially an issue in Cape Cod, where there's mostly sandy substrate causing sinking, and then also the depletion of groundwater causes land subsidence as well. So the melting of the glaciers, thermal expansion, land subsidence, all taken together are causing the sea level to rise. And there's a lot of uncertainty with all these different factors at play that I'll get into. And so when we think about the impacts of climate change looking forward, we're not only thinking about sea level rise, but we're also thinking about increased frequency and intensity of storm events. And so the term that is used to describe the sea level plus the storm is called storm tide. And so moving forward, thinking about resiliency and the impacts of climate change, sea level rise will have to be added into the equation with these increased storm events and intensity and frequency. And so the Northeast Climate Adaptation Science Center at UMass Amherst actually put together sea level rise projections that have been adopted by the state of Commonwealth of Massachusetts for planning purposes. And so we've taken these numbers, and this is the sea level rise projections for localized to the Woods Hole tide gauge. So it's as close as you can get to Barnstable. And so as you can see, they break down the uncertainty into probability percentiles, so most likely to very unlikely scenarios. And so you can see there's a great deal of uncertainty as you move into the future, even into 2100. The 50th percentile has about 2.5 feet of sea level rise, but it's within the realm of possibility that there could be 10 feet of sea level rise by 2100. And so the number we've chosen to stay consistent with for our projects is 2.75 feet of sea level rise by 2100, and this is the 50th percentile and an average of the medium and high emission scenarios. And as some of you may know, very recently the UN released a report talking about the impacts of climate change, and they made clear that there's not a lot of hope of staying within this intermediate range, and that we should start thinking about some of these more extreme scenarios. So keep that in mind. We're using a relatively conservative estimate for sea level rise. Likewise, NOAA has produced storm event scenarios. So this is actual tide gauge data for Woods Hole as well, back to 1938. And so you can see there's an upward trend, and that's because the sea level has indeed risen 8 inches since 1938. And those spikes you see are the extreme storm events that have happened since 1938. So that's the actual level of the sea rising on a particular day. And using that graph, they were able to produce sea level or like flood levels for the 1% and the 10% storm. And so what that means is a 1% storm has a 1% chance of happening in any given year. A 10% storm obviously has a 10% chance of happening in any given year. And so the numbers that NOAA has produced are a 4.8 feet of flooding for a 10% storm and 7.7 feet for a 1% storm. And so when we combine sea level rise in 2100 with those 1% and 10% storm levels, the numbers we are going to be exploring and our proposals are 7.5 feet of flooding in a 10% storm in 2100 and 10.5 feet of flooding above the current high tide, a 1% chance of 10.5 feet in 2100. And so what does this mean for Barnstable? This is a very brief overview of some of the vulnerabilities that the town could expect in 2100. With the blue is 7.5 feet of flooding, so that would be could be a 10% chance of that happening in any given year in 2100. And so what we've done is looked at both social and physical vulnerabilities. You can in the darker gray areas are the highest population density The hatching is environmental justice areas, which are predominantly poor and minority and non-English speaking populations. And then lastly, you see key emergency infrastructure such as the hospital, the fire station, and other like kind of hazardous facilities, storage tanks. And so this kind of begins to paint a picture of what the town might begin to see moving forward. And our focus areas will explore different proposals for each of these areas. And so in conclusion, increasing coastal resilience is going to involve an understanding of these complex dynamics, geomorphological processes, sea level rise, and the different coastal typologies and the resilience found within those systems. There's a temporal element as well here. There's geomorphological processes that are occurring over long time scales, but also cataclysmic events like storms to take into account. And so our class has explored tactical adaptations and strategies for resilience at each of these 4 focus areas that the town has given us: Blish Point, Hyannis Harbor, and Stewart's Creek, and Sampson Island. These strategies are intended to inform the town's planning process moving forward as we begin to address resilience. These are just a set of ideas and amongst many other different options. And we've taken this kind of strategy to resilience using living systems and ecological principles. And so now we're going to move forward with our 4 focus areas. We're just going to jump right in, and I believe Blish Point is going to begin. And so I guess we'll just jump right into that, right? Great.
Hi, my name is Dania. This is Jess and Josiah. We're a group of 3 who've been focused on Blish Point and Barnstable Harbor, an area that has been recommended to us by town officials. We call this proposal Stormy Days, Proactive Approach. So as you all know, Blish Point is located on the northern coast of Barnstable, on Cape Cod Bay, and that entails that it experiences wave fluctuations, tidal fluctuations of 9 to 11 feet. Zooming in onto our area of study are the Great Marshes, a tucked-in conservation land, Sandy Neck, a substantial dune system that protects the inlands. It is on Cape Cod Bay, as you could see. It protects the inlands. And Blish Point and Barnstable Harbor. Looking at our focus area that has been recommended to us, as you could see, it's in a rectangular yellow rectangle, and this is where we've been focused. We'll walk you through our site analysis first, and then our design proposal.
While looking at the Blish Point area, there are 3 major community or social zones, and that is the Commerce Road residential neighborhood that was built on a previous natural dune system and infill tidal marsh. The Barnstable Harbor is vital to the community, historically and currently active. And the Barnstable Village Center is along 6A and very important to the town for town functions as well. There are 3 major environmental zones that we've looked at. The beach environment, the tidal marsh environment system, south of the residential neighborhood. Having these 2 areas where storm inundation occurs makes the residential area very exposed and vulnerable to flooding because it occurs on 2 sides. This is an elevation map of the Blish Point area. In the dark red maroon, you see the high points, and the light sandy color are the low points. This is important because the low points are where tidal fluctuations occur now, so these points are inundated. And in the next lighter orange color, this is where areas are inundated when storm surge occurs. So it's a great area that is vulnerable currently. And this shows where the prevailing currents move from east to west, even though it is on the north coast by the Cape Cod Bay, because it is within the Sandy Neck area. It erodes. The currents are different, and it erodes in the east and deposits sediment in the west. Storm surge comes directly for the Blish Point neighborhood, and it comes in through the Sandy Neck, the gap between the Sandy Neck and the mainland, and it has eroded Blish Point Beach and some tactics that have already been put in place to try to protect the area. This is a storm simulation of what a 2018 1% storm looks like in the Blish Point area. This 1% storm means it has a 1 in 100 chance of occurring per year, but this type of storm actually occurred twice in the last year. In 2018, I'm sure everyone knows, everyone's nodding yes, so you all know that, but in January and in March. These are, when we did our site visit back in September, we met this couple, the Ellises. They live near the Barnstable Village Center, and they showed us some pictures of what the flooding of one of these 1% storms looked like in their backyard. And then we searched the internet for some more photos, and this is what the Blish Point neighborhood looks like with one of these 1% storms. And as you can see, it's a lot of flooding occurs right up to the residents' houses. And this is only going to get worse. This is a storm simulation for 2100 for a 1% storm. As you can see, the harbor is completely inundated, and the flooding within the residential area is much worse. Something else to note, in 2100, one of the 1% storms that have occurred now will actually become a 10% storm in 2100. So it will occur much more frequently, and the storms will become much more intense over time.
So we have a rather bold proposal for Blish Point. And this graphic here represents what a 1% storm in 2100 might do. And what you're looking at is a variety of living systems and hard infrastructure that is working to protect Blish Point, but it's been done through a staged or a process over time. So we can't get to this 2100 vision without a process. So we'll walk you through how we might get there. We'll start with 2030, when some of these systems can be established. We'll move you through 2060 and on to 2100, where the system is strengthened and eventually reaches a point of greater resilience. And we'll be using 4 key strategies. One is make room, essentially retreat. And we would start retreat in the most vulnerable neighborhoods indicated in red, where either through the coercion of the sea or through different programs, residents would be compelled to move from these vulnerable places. And when they do, natural defenses like dunes or a feeder beach can be installed in their place to begin building up the coastal defense to protect everyone else on the interior. Also, we would include controlled flooding, where existing tidal marshes would be allowed to expand into the interior, alleviating some of the flood water that builds up in the tidal marshes now, and keep some of that flooding from spilling in to the neighborhood on this side. And all of these combined are to protect areas that are either impossible to move, like the harbor, or important areas on the interior that can potentially survive a lot of sea level rise in the long term.
So as Josiah has mentioned, Make Room is one of the strategies we're undertaking. And the tactic we're using to do that is phased retreat. While we understand there are other tactics the town could explore, such as raising houses or building seawalls, but we are undertaking phased retreat to study its benefits and what it could do to the neighborhood of Blish Point and Barnstable Harbor. So some of the costs of not retreating and the benefits of not retreating and what that can mean for the neighborhood. So it could mean loss of homes and possibly loss of lives, inevitably damage to infrastructure, and the town can apply for federal or state funding for retreat or other things such as living shorelines. The benefits for not retreating is just a delay in relocating those homes and short-term emotional and financial relief perhaps for those who live in that neighborhood. And the cost of phased retreat is the cost of relocating those homes, is the cost of like a short-term emotional cost for those affected, of course, but the benefits we believe outweigh those costs. Some of the benefits that we have summarized here, there are a lot of other benefits, of course. Some of them are protecting inland residents and possibly lives, ecological benefits, phasing out infrastructure, and gaining new public living shorelines. While these are some of the costs and benefits, we know that the costs for phased retreats are substantial. We understand that this is a bold idea, and perhaps it just ignites a conversation that the town can explore further on by doing detailed economic studies, detailed engineering studies, and perhaps continue to study with the residents what they can do, what is the best option for those residents. Yep, so we basically
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Dan. And then, so we've, within the established 2030 phasing plan, the tactics include the Making Room, a phased retreat, and then other tactics include some natural defenses now that we have some room to protect and fade in a more resilient area. And some of these tactics include a natural dune system, and these are adaptive and dynamic because if they're breached, they have the chance to grow back. A groin and eelgrass system. The groins catch the sand by interrupting littoral drift, and the eelgrass system anchors the entire structure. A sand motor and jetty system. The sand motor is a feeder beach that's deposited in that yellow circle there at that location. It would be deposited from dredged sediment from the harbor that happens periodically. And this feeder beach over time moves down the coastline, protecting the coastline or building up the coastline with the groin system and with the jetty system. It enhances, builds, and protects the beach down current from it, and the crescent jetty at the end traps the sand and stops it from drifting to the boat channel, and is also a multifunctional recreation area in the future. Another tactic for a natural defense is this oyster reef wave attenuation structure. This is a floating structure that is tethered along the boat channel, and it grows oysters on a rope media. This protects the shoreline and disrupts and diffuses wave energy as its major function. A second function is as a commercial oyster farm. And then after integrating some natural defenses, it's important to add some controlled flooding tactics. One of these being a flood control culvert. This take in water during a storm, but it's also dynamic in the way that it'll allow salt marshes to expand upland over time.
So we've walked you through establishment. Now it's time to begin to strengthen the system. To talk a little bit more about this diagram, this yellow, where's my laser? This yellow blob indicates the feeder beach or sand motor that's being pushed by the currents to protect the coastline and provide sand that through geomorphological process is building up the dunes. As the wind pushes the sand and is caught by the dune grass, it builds up over time. The groins are also facilitating in the extension and enhancement of the beach, as well as the crescent jetty system. The red indicates another phased retreat area. This by 2060 will become the vulnerable neighborhood, even with these adaptations proposed by 2030. These residents ideally would move voluntarily, or there would be some program that would pay back their losses for their relocation. The streets would become decommissioned, starting from Millway, the magenta strip here. The road would be decommissioned starting from this point towards the east. The wetlands would continue to be allowed to flood, or excuse me, to expand. The tidal marshes will continue to expand inland. And in low road areas, pontoon roads or bridges will be assembled so as to allow that water to move freely. More hard engineering will be added along Millway Lane, creating a raised or elevated road system that will maintain access from the village to Blish Point. It'll also serve as an interior jetty system, so when storm surge does occur, it'll protect the harbor and interior areas there. And then this purple oval here is a multifunctional emergency management staging area that will look like a dune and be part of the dune structure, but will be essentially a surge fortress within the dune. So what some of these tactics look like, this is a mix of natural processes and engineered defenses. A living retaining wall along the elevated road would include a permeable structure that allows water both in and out, and it would be planted with upland species that over time the species composition would change as sea level rises. The same tactic could be applied at the village center along 6A, living retaining wall planted with upland species that transitions over time into more tidal marsh species. And then the dune structure, the multifunctional emergency location staging area would be both for when crisis occurs. This staging area would allow access by air, sea, and water. A helicopter landing strip could be on the top floor, and boats could pull up on the bottom, and they could obviously access the elevated road. But it's multifunctional. It's for all those other sunny days, people can still pull their boats through this building and park their boats in there. And the second floor, which is all contained behind a artificial dune, could house some of the overflow parking from the whale watching and the harbor functions. And the top floor could be all pedestrian friendly with cultural event space, with sweeping views of the bay, and different events could happen up there as indicated in this sketch. So again, as we build natural defenses, strategically retreat, allow for controlled flooding to ultimately protect interior areas, we get to 2100, where a robust tidal marsh system has essentially replaced much of the Commerce Road neighborhood, as well as a vast dune system that is integrated with a recreational trail system, whether it's biking, jogging, or even equestrian friendly. And this system is both what this neighborhood becomes is not just a place of relocation and nature moving in, it is actually also protecting the wider interior of Barnstable, just the way Sandy Neck is protecting Barnstable today. And by multifunctional, here's a rendering of the Crescent Jetty. So while it's serving a function, it provides a new opportunity for people to access the water, to go for walks and enjoy themselves. But when it's stormy, it can serve its function, protecting the harbor, protecting the mainland. And so this rendering tries to put a positive spin on a very difficult situation. This is one that, it's a vision that looks at expensive infrastructure, difficult choices around relocation, but that looks for potential new opportunities for Barnstable. One that doesn't create a wall around the town, but maybe offers new recreational and tourist opportunities that can allow people to continue to enjoy everything that the Cape is about: the beach, the weather, the beauty. So we hope that this idea and is as controversial as it may be, is likely the way, the direction that Blish Point might have to go as sea level rises. And this, the point here is that no flood wall can protect Blish Point. It's likely too expensive, and by building a 10-foot wall around the town will only disrupt everything that people like about this area. It's probably too expensive to do so. By utilizing natural systems, by harnessing geomorphological processes and ecological processes, those systems can create good defenses that have added value by their secondary benefits, like recreation and habitat. And unfortunately, the prediction models are pretty dire. They predict a grim future for this area. And so whether this proposal or the proposals of our colleagues, any conversation that stimulates here in Barnstable is better than wait and see. Thank you.
All right, my name is Mitch. This is my partner Ying Chung, and our project's called Resilient Harbor, a museum without walls. So our focus area is in Hyannis Harbor, located in the southeastern part of Barnstable. This is an aerial view of Hyannis Harbor. You have downtown Hyannis, just in walking distance, Hyannis Airport to the north, and then Cape Cod Hospital to the east. Yellow is outlined our project focus area that we'll look at. And just a quick outline, we're gonna first talk about the existing conditions, and then go into our design objectives, and then finally our proposal. And Ying Chung is gonna take it away with the existing conditions.
So in the Hyannis Harbor, in Hyannis Harbor, and there are mainly 3 issues. The first one is the water quality. Through our GIS set analysis map, and we did the survey of the impervious surface and outfall pipes. And the gray area shows the impervious surface, which are mainly the urban area and the parking lot. And the right dots are the outfall pipes, which bring the storm water directly into the sea. And the storm water bring by underground outfall pipes and the runoff from the surface, from the impervious surface, create multiple discharges to the water, which cause the pollution. Also, the boats here spills oil when people refill the boats, so it can be found obviously that someplace there are oil floating on the water. And the second issue is a functioning harbor. Hyannis Harbor is a major, very busy harbor on the Cape Cod, and it has many different land uses like commercial, residential, and maritime, as you see on these land use maps. And there are 2 ferry and 1 terminal, and service the transportation function, and different types of boats like the fishing boat, commercial boat, leisure time boat, and private boat. And it's also the center of the tourism in Cape Cod. Lots of restaurants and hotels here, and art gallery, and residents enjoy taking the walk here. So it's a challenge to redesign the harbor that has so much functions, and to keep this functioning harbor is our goal. So the third issue is flooding. The most public space in the Highness Harbor are under the 5 feet elevation, which makes it high exposure to the flooding and the future sea level rise. The map on the left shows the future sea level rise inundation area, and also the different flooding projection on the harbor. So the first image on the left shows the 1% possibility storm flooding area in 2,100 years. So you can see the most area of the harbor are immersed. So it looks like a huge disaster from the image. And even in the last year, as the second image shows, the Bismore Park was attacked by the storm surge, and it seriously impacted the functioning of the harbor. So Mitch will talk about the objectives.
So now we've broken down our design objectives into these 4 objectives. Improving the water quality by adding things such as green infrastructure, and then moving the parking lots that are adjacent around the harbor to more upland locations. Next, addressing the flooding by adding retreating certain structures that are in flood-prone areas, having some sort of program that could help pay for this to more upland, more protected areas. Then adding certain resilient structures in place of these retreat areas that can help protect from flooding. And then elevating certain streets along the harbor. And then we look to keep the harbor functioning, so keeping the 2 ferry terminals that are very important to the bay. Then rebalancing the number of commercial and private boating. Then finally, adding floating buildings such as shops and restaurants that could adapt to sea level rise and flooding. And then keeping public access around the harbor. And then finally, we look to educate people about resiliency, creating these exhibit spaces about resiliency where you can learn the importance, and also making Barnstable become a leader in resiliency that not only the Cape could witness, but the whole world. So our proposal looks to create this museum without walls model that integrates the functions of the harbor with these resilient landscapes around it. So we broke it down into these different exhibit spaces, we call them, where it's an educational and tourist attraction that you walk through the site and you can see these different landscapes working with the functions of the harbor to protect it as well. And then we move in, we're gonna create this sort of resilient trail network along the way where you'll have these certain stops exhibit resiliency spots. And looking at the master plan, we broke it down into first to the south, a residential neighborhood where you first would retreat the properties, add a boardwalk and then a dune system, and then you move to Bismore Park, elevate streets, add a berm system, living shorelines. Michael Park will be a constructed wetland, and then the waterfront park would be this Hyannis Harbor Park would be a retreat and also a waterfront park as well. So now we're going to take you through a tour, starting with a residential neighborhood, looking at each one. And starting here, this is an existing section. Right now, there's residential properties right along the shoreline. They're currently protected by bulkheads or seawalls that currently protect them for now. But if you look at the 1% storm in 2100, the water would clearly go over these bulkheads into the properties, flooding them out, causing damage, and then also flooding Bayshore Road and damaging the whole neighborhood. So what we look to do is create a boardwalk dune system that would protect the neighborhood, and it would be this very resilient, strong structure that is backed by a fringe marsh that would first like stabilize it, and then you have the front dunes with grasses that would really keep it structurally sound with their roots built in, and then have a pedestrian boardwalk around the way. And if you look at the 1% storm in 2100, the sea level rise and the storms would protect, this dune would protect the neighborhood. And looking at a perspective, this is what it looked like walking along the boardwalk. You'd enter these sort of doorway to a different exhibit space. It would inform you that now you're walking into this dune exhibit. There would be informative signing, and the trail of resiliency would lead you to each of these signs that would talk about the beach grasses and how they really stabilize the dunes, and the fringe marshes, how they'll stabilize the dunes and create this strong structure that would protect the neighborhood. And you could also, as you walk along the trail, you would get great views of Highness Harbor as well. And moving along up, you head into Bishmore Park and the existing conditions. Right now, it's a very commercial, busy harbor front, a very tourist attractive spot. There's an art promenade along it that attracts a lot of people, but it's only protected by these bulkheads that currently get flooded from major storms. And if you look at the 1% storm in 2100, the water clearly rises above the bulkheads, would flood out the promenade space and then onto Ocean Ave, and then cause damage to the hotels and restaurants adjacent to the park. So what we would look to do is first elevate Ocean Street to protect it from sea level rise in these storms. Have a constructed berm that leads down into this living shoreline area that can retreat and adjust with sea level rise and flooding. Have a floating walkway that makes you feel like you are still a part of the functioning harbor. You'll have commercial boats that can still operate, and people have great views of the harbor. And then you have floating wetlands. And then you have the 1% storm in 2100. The elevated street is clearly dry, and the adjacent hotels and restaurants are undamaged. It only goes up to the berm, and as the water leaves out, the park is resilient. It can actually go back to functioning as a park, and the boardwalk can float and adjust to sea level rise. And then we move in, closer look at this living shoreline. Again, you have these sort of doorway spaces telling you you're into this new exhibit space of this living shoreline harbor walk. The trail of resiliency leading, talking about how the living shoreline can retreat and adapt to sea level rise and flooding. You have the great views of the harbor. It will still make you feel like you're a part of this very busy, influent harbor, and also talk about the sort of maritime history of the harbor, which is a very key aspect as well. And now Ying Chung will talk about her site design at Michael Park.
This slide shows the Michael Park at different future sea level rise and different like 1%, 10% at now, and 1%, 10% in 2,100 years of the stormwater flooding area show. So the park, this park has the steepest topo on the harbor. And the problem here is the multiple stormwater discharges to the sea, and the steep topo brings surface runoff, and also the outfall pipes around at the bottom of this park brings the concentrated stormwater from the downtown Hyannis without any water treatment, and then directly released to the harbor's water. And the lawn, the grass on the Michael Park also bring the fertilizer to the water, and the lawn doesn't stabilize the sandy form type soil, and it also has a high maintenance. And our strategy is to change the planting species. So at our proposed design, we use the more native coastal plants and this constructed wetland combined with the outfall pipes together to filter the stormwater, clean it, and then release to the sea. The town already make the efforts at this area, like the wetland built on the pleasure park, and also the oyster filtration box here too. So our strategy is to reinforce this wetland idea and remove the parking lot here originally, and filter more stormwater, create the barrier to the storm surge, and decrease the wave energy during the storm, during the flood event. Also create more public access to the waterfront. So the last exhibit spot is the Highness Harbor Park. So as you can see, originally it has a 2 parking lot and a small parking area here. This area, they are all under the 5 feet elevation. It has a high flooding exposure and embraced by the water, which create a good views. So it's a good opportunity to expand the Highness Harbor Park and move out the 2 parking lots, create the park with a living shoreline, tidal wetland plant species, and create a back trail, walking trail, and a fishing space for people to fully enjoy the waterfront. So our proposal here create a education opportunity for all the people. So you can see this is in the center. This is an amphitheater with a huge glass wall on the front. On the glass wall, which has different benchmarks about the sea level, about the water level height, like the future sea level rise and the different risks of flooding now. And it creates a landmark here, a warning, and a monument to give people directly feeling about the scenario for the coastal hazard in the future. And the waterfront park is resilient because it's easy to evacuate people during flood event. And the plant living and the native wetland plants stabilize the soil, resist erosion. And the rendering here shows the different 2 different elevation of the park divided by this barn. The barn, which is also this amphitheater, steps and the benches. So the redesign makes the flooding challenge into an opportunity, makes it a popular tourism attraction, serve both to the local residents and the tourists. And also the Baxton's Boathouse restaurant will be retreated to the back on a higher elevation place and less flooding risks and a good view to both park and the sea for the background.
So in conclusion, our Resilient Harbor looks to integrate the functions of the harbor with these resilient landscape features to improve the water quality, address the flooding, keep the harbor functioning as is, and then finally really educate people about resiliency, create an attraction that brings more people to the harbor and to educate them about resiliency, and will really show that Barnstable is one of the forefront leaders in the issue. All right, thank you.
Thank you everyone for sticking with us. My partner Tia and I are going to talk about our proposal for resiliency at Stewart's Creek.
What? Okay. So we're going to begin by going over our strategy for Stewart's Creek. That's annoying. We'll give a little introduction of the site, and then we'll go into our proposal. So we're using a living layered approach to coastal resiliency on Stewart's Creek. So a living layered approach is going to reduce risk through redundancy and basically create a safe-to-fail approach to coastal resiliency at Stewart's Creek. Stewart's Creek is uniquely positioned to become a resilient community using the systems that are already there, including the salt marsh, the dunes at Keys Memorial Public Beach, and introducing a submerged breakwater, which will involve restoring oyster reefs that are already native to New England. So we know that Stewart's Creek is currently infested with Phragmites, which is a common reed. And while Phragmites is really good at uptaking nitrogen and really good at stabilizing substrate because it has a robust root system that prevents sudden erosion, it is not resilient to salt water. The species in salt marshes have co-evolved with fluctuating tides for thousands of years and have a unique zonation pattern that allow the salt marsh to adapt and expand and move inward as the sea level rises. And Phragmites cannot do that. So when the sea level rises and the Phragmites is inundated with salt water, the Phragmites will die and will not be able to stabilize the substrate in the way that the species that are native to salt marshes can. So that's why one of the main focuses of our proposal for Stewart's Creek is restoring the salt marsh. So the goals for this proposal include enhancing coastal resiliency. We want to use the adaptable living systems that are already present at Stewart's Creek. And we want to do this while supporting the local economy, creating recreational opportunities, and supporting the abundant beauty that's already present at this site. So Stewart's Creek is located in the southeast corner of Barnstable. It is on the ferry route to Nantucket, and it's between Hyannisport and Hyannis. One of the main thoroughways is Ocean Avenue. There's also Keys Memorial Public Beach, and Stewart's Creek is a predominantly suburban residential area. Offshore, Hyannis Harbor is dominated by a rocky, silty substrate. It's very shallow, and there's already an existing 3,000-foot breakwater that protects the harbor. Until 2013, Stewart's Creek was practically disconnected from the Nantucket Sound, and there's only limited tidal flushing allowed by a 3-foot diameter culvert. In 2013, the Army Corps of Engineers replaced the culvert with a 6 foot wide by 4 foot high culvert that moves under Ocean Avenue with the goals of restoring the salt marsh habitat, increasing tidal flushing, improving water quality, and also giving the town control over the amount of water that moves in and out of Stewart's Creek. Unfortunately, the tidal levels were not reaching the heights anticipated by the Army Corps of Engineers, and the Phragmites infestation has persisted, and this limits visual and physical access to the marsh and also reduces its resiliency for the reasons I discussed when I was talking about how the salt marshes are naturally resilient. There's also been a significant amount of infill and development along the marsh, which makes these homes very vulnerable to the effects of sea level rise. Ocean Avenue, which is a main road used by the local community and the town, is highly exposed to flooding and storm surge, and is in danger of potentially washing out or damaged because there's only a limited amount of protection provided by the dune that exists on Ocean Avenue. And we know, as we discussed earlier in the introduction, that Hurricane Bob has previously flooded the road, which makes a solution for Ocean Avenue coping with these flooding events more urgent. And we talked about how Phragmites limits physical and visual access to the creek. There's also not many public access trails around the marsh. There's only one trail that's unlabeled And it would be nice to increase opportunities for recreation around the marsh and get people to engage with the environment a bit more. And now Ben is going to go over some of the flooding risks that we find at Stewart's Creek.
Thank you, Tia. Alrighty. So, Stewart's Creek, as we see here, is located directly adjacent to Nantucket Sound, only protected from the ocean by the salt marsh, as well as the narrow strip of land that Ocean Avenue sits on. And so in this area, there's a high degree of flood exposure. And so this is a map of the Stewart's Creek area showing the current flood risk in 2018, the 10% and 1% storms. And so as you can see here, there's an area of high vulnerability along the eastern edge of the salt marsh. Some homes are in the 10% and a few more are in the 1% storm ranges. And this is due to the elevation along the salt marsh's edge. There's a high point on the western edge of 21 feet, but the eastern side is predominantly low lying at around 9 to 12 feet, many of those homes are at. And so moving forward to 2100, as we've discussed earlier with sea level rise and increasing storm intensity and frequency, there's going to be an increasing level of vulnerability for the homes that are along the eastern edge. Some are in the 10% and even more are within that 1% range as well. And so this is a simulation of what the 10% storm in 2100 could look like. You see Ocean Avenue is totally flooded over. Many homes along the eastern edge are in harm's way. And even moving up northwards, you see an expanded salt marsh as well. And so in summary of our existing conditions for this site, we've only touched on the complex hydrological dynamics that are shaping this area with the new culvert in place. The area, Stewart's Creek is changing, as we speak right now with the new tide levels fluctuating. The salt marsh will need to expand with sea level rise. There's limited physical and visual access because of the Phragmites infestation in this area, which limits how much the public can really engage with this beautiful natural asset. There's homes with existing increasing flood vulnerability. And lastly, Ocean Avenue and the dunes are highly vulnerable to flooding, but they also provide an important level of protection as well. And so as we began to think about our proposal, we settled on these design goals. First and foremost is enhancing coastal resiliency. That was our goal. Utilizing adaptable and living systems. Stewart's Creek is, as we said, well positioned to face, to increase resiliency because of the salt marsh, because of the dunes that are already there. And our proposal really just looks to restore and enhance what's there. And finally, resiliency isn't only about storm protection, it's about people embracing where they live and loving where they live. And so we also look to increase recreation opportunities, increase the abundant natural beauty, and connect with the local economy and culture of the area. And so now we're gonna jump into our proposal for increasing resiliency at Stewart's Creek. I'm gonna move through these series of section diagrams that show the flood levels. So first, we're gonna start with the salt marsh and then move our way down to the dunes and then finally to the breakwater proposal. And so as we see here, this is the 2018 high tide. There's invasive Phragmites and the homes just only slightly elevated above the salt marsh. Currently in 2018, this is the 10% and 1% storm levels. Those homes are flooded as they were just earlier this year with with the nor'easters that hit this area, and definitely Hurricane Bob. In 2100, the sea level itself, this is the high tide, so that first row of homes will be, sitting in the marsh. And this is a do-nothing approach. And looking at the 10% and 1% storms, there's increasing levels of vulnerability for the homes that do remain. And so our proposal for the salt marsh is to allow it to expand. However, first and foremost, we recommend that you restore the marsh into the natural zonation that Tia pointed out, because of that inherent resilience found in salt marshes. And so we recommend one strategy is to relocate that first row of homes that are most vulnerable, and with that space vacated, allow the marsh to expand, which provides very important level of protection for the homes that do remain. And with that space, we can also put in a boardwalk that allows people to access and engage with the salt marsh, which, having been restored, is a beautiful natural area that supports an abundance of wildlife as well. And so here you see we've also recommended a protective berm that goes around the outside of the salt marsh, so as the sea level does rise and floods occur, with the space vacated again, we're able to provide a certain level of protection for the homes that do remain, the many, many homes that do remain around Stewart's Creek. And so here you see the existing conditions for Stewart's Creek, Phragmites, infestation, homes that are vulnerable, the existing culvert. And then this is what we expect with sea level rise, the salt marsh having expanded, with homes out of harm's way. We've also put in a boat launch, a looping boardwalk that links up to the north, where I believe that might be Main Street up there. The road has been raised, and then we've also widened the culvert as well. And just because this is fun to do, watching the salt marsh expand. And so this illustration also shows our proposal for Ocean Avenue and the widened culvert. One thing in conversations with hydrologists and some marine ecologists, we've come to understand that to adapt with sea level rise, salt marshes actually, they need sediment coming in and out of the systems. And as it is now, the culvert, while it does provide an important level of flood protection, is actually limiting the amount of sediment coming in and out of the salt marsh. And so it may not be able to adapt to sea level rise. And so our recommendation is to widen the culvert, and, as I'll show you as well, to raise the road as well. And so just to get back up a little bit into our retreat strategy, we've identified 14 homes that are currently very vulnerable and will be increasingly vulnerable. So the 14 homes we've identified are in the 2,100, 10% range. And zooming out a little bit, we see, this is a very large suburban neighborhood with a number of homes. And while this is obviously a very difficult proposition, and just one of many options that the town could explore, we're providing a vision of what could be done with those 14 homes out of harm's way to protect the wider community of Stewart's Creek. And here's just another visualization of before and after, showing the salt marsh having been restored, providing that buffer to storms, and also bringing people in to the salt marsh as a recreation asset. And lastly, just showing the visualization again. So moving southward from the salt marsh to the dune, or kind of the dune road and culvert system, this is the current conditions. Ocean Avenue is very exposed and vulnerable to flooding as it is now. It's only about 5.5 to 6 feet off the ground. And so a 10% storm just gets above Ocean Avenue. A 1% storm certainly can cause significant damage to Ocean Avenue. And as the town just invested millions into that new culvert, it's an important asset to protect as well. And Ocean Avenue is an important pedestrian and vehicular thoroughfare. And so as a first recommendation, this is the existing conditions. You see a fairly flat dune system and not a lot of protection. And so in 2030, give or take, we recommend restoring that dune system that's adjacent to Ocean Avenue to provide a buffer and armor against the storm surge and flooding. This will also entail basically, we recommend like a reinforced dune to provide another level of engineering and strengthening as well. And then fast forwarding to 2100, as I mentioned earlier, the widened culvert and raising the road to get it out of harm's way. And then in section, we see this is the 2100 proposal. The sea level will have risen to 0.75 feet. Sediment is able to flow in and out of the culvert, having been widened. And with the road raised, the 10% and 1% storms are able to go in and out of the culvert without damaging the road, and the dune will have been restored to provide an important level of protection as well. And so again, here's another visualization of the existing conditions and our proposal or our vision for 2100 of what Ocean Avenue could look like. And so as we began, we started talking about our living layered approach. We're starting with the salt marsh as a level of protection. The dune on Ocean Avenue provides another level of protection. And our first line of defense is a submerged breakwater that Tia will describe to us.
So some of the approaches, or all of the approaches we've used, are using habitats that are already found at Stewart's Creek. Oyster reefs were once found all over the eastern seaboard but have been depleted by dredging. And these provided a natural breakwater and created a habitat for other fish. And we know that fisheries and shellfish are very important to culture on Cape Cod. So oysters not only form great natural breakwaters, but they're also excellent at improving water quality. One oyster can filter up to 50 gallons of water a day, and an acre of oyster reef can filter up to 36 Olympic-sized swimming pools of water a day. So not only can oyster reefs provide protection from storm surge and flooding and support the local economy, but they can also improve water quality. The important thing about the oyster life cycle is that oysters want to settle on other oysters. So they self-build these reefs. And we're suggesting capitalizing on the fact that Cape Cod already has organizations that collect recycled oyster shells, restore reefs. Mass Oyster Project is an example of one of those organizations. So some of these, this infrastructure is already in place. We can use it, and we can use these recycled shells to establish oyster reefs that are be reinforced with ecocrete and rubble, and build natural living breakwaters. The structure we're suggesting uses a spur and groove formation that's actually found in barrier reefs in the Caribbean. Obviously, we don't have coral reefs on Cape Cod, but we can use this typology and this formation to create a reef structure that not only reduces erosion to the reef itself, but also helps dissipate wave energy. So we've discussed our living layered approach. I just went over our first line of defense, which is this submerged breakwater composed of oysters. Ben talked about our proposal for reinforced dunes and also restoring the salt marsh. And all of these adaptable living systems help enhance coastal resiliency at Stewart's Creek, while also supporting the local economy, supporting the local fisheries, supporting shell fishing, creating recreation opportunities, getting people into the marsh, enjoying the marsh, connecting with it, and enjoying the natural beauty that's found there. So in conclusion, Stewart's Creek is well positioned to become more resilient using what's already there. And it's very important to note this because these coastal typologies are already found throughout Cape Cod. So Stewart's Creek could be a unique pilot area to test out some of these strategies, and then if they're successful, apply them to other areas on Cape Cod that have these coastal typologies. And we want to emphasize that resiliency is not limited to protecting the coastline from storm events, but it also refers to the resiliency of the community and incorporates social and environmental connectivity. Because if people are engaged with their environment and have an appreciation for the environment, then they're more likely to be invested in it and protect it. Thank you. And now Jerry is going to discuss his proposal for Sampson's Island.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm Jerry, and my focus area is the Simpsons Island, and my topic is resilient Simpsons Island in Dead Neck. So the first one is the location. So the island is located southwest of Barnstable. It's long and narrow island, and Simpsons Island, Dead Neck is a classic example of a coastal barrier island. Barrier Island once existed across much of the southern coast of Cape Cod along the Sound. This barrier beach has been developed and modified to keep navigation channels open into many of the Cape Bays, including the three bays of Australia. Okay, and the first, the picture is about the currents. Because the prevailing tidal currents approach the island at the angle, as you can see, longshore currents form that transport sediment from east to west through a process known as lateral draft. So, as described above, a major dredging operation has recently begun to move a large amount of material from the Covent Bay and to the West Bay end of the island. So the second picture is about the elevation. The topography of the whole island shown a trade of west height and east low. The high point of the west side of the island is about 3.5 meter above sea level, and the commanding high point of the whole island lies in the middle of the island, which is about 5.5 meters above sea level. To the east of the island is the currently eroding dunes with a commanding height of about 2 meters above sea level. So during storm barrier island, much of the energy of waves and storm shocks. As a result, the mainland can be protected from coastal flooding by the island. So, okay. And this is about the erosion. The island is affected by east to west longshore currents, as you can see in the picture. So causing erosion on the east end and deposition at the west end. After a length permitting process, a multi-year dredging project has recently begun. So the dredging will move approximately 50,000 of the dredged sand from the west end to the east end. So the dredging operation presents a real opportunity to restore a more robust dune system to the east end of the island. So this is the wetland situation, and these are important natural and landscape resource for future island development. And this is the public access. There's moderate amount of seasonal informal public access to the east end of the island. Most access is by small motorboats and paddle craft. So as you can see, there's several yellow points. It just show where people always go. And this is about the vegetation. So the barrier island provide a naturally resilient barrier to coastal storm. They are typically structured by some nature dune system with the dune grass and just like the oak, the red cedar, and several unique special vegetation in this island. And as you can see, there's a three-part divide to show where is the most rich vegetation resource in this island. Okay, so this is the interesting map, I think. So there's just show several birds, shorebirds lived in this island, and intact Barrier Island spot important wildlife species, particularly shorebirds, including the piping. I don't know how to say the name, but it's called the piping plover. Yeah. Okay, so so this is the existing conditions and problems from those analyses I told before. As you can see, there's the red is, I think, the problem we should do some change, especially the unstable island erosion and water quality, sea level rise, flood, and developed island for recreation and environment education. Okay, so this is my strategy. There's two parts. The first one is working system, and the second one is living system, which including the living breakwaters and protect habitat for shorebirds. Yeah, and the strategy big ideas is there is a three big ideas. The first one is to restore the island as a healthy barrier island that provides protection, and second is improve habitat, and third is the moderate amount of public access to this unique ecosystem. So there's some hand-drawn sketch to show what is the living breakwaters look like, and the concept of protect habitat. So as you can see in the left, so this is just show how it looks like of the beach. So the living breakwater is placed on the southern side of the island, and its average distance to the coast of island is about 300 feet. And the reason for this is that the main flood risk comes from the southern side of the island, while at the same time leaving enough space for the local people to navigate. And in the right hand, there is the concept of protect habitat. So Simpsons Island is regraded as the public protection habitat of local birds, which limited the range of protection and makes it impossible for the people to enter, so as to ensure the normal reproduction and survival of birds. At the same time, people can clearly observe the life track of birds through the viewing platform, which has educational significance. So there is the several pictures from the internet I find to show how the living breakwaters look like. As you can see, these two pictures, the living breakwater is about, I designed the living breakwater is about 20 meters wide. It is divided into 4 layers. The bottom layers is cement base, and the next layer is the rocky matrix, and the second layers is the gravel layers, and the top layers is the living reef, strait, and living island. So the most concept and I think the most interesting idea is this cement box. As you can see, there's 4 cement box. So put 4 different cement box in different layers of breakwaters, just like the oyster unit, the fish harp, and the tidal planter and oyster shears. Different box carry different functions. They have the functions of refuel water's quality and provide food for local fish, and fixed plants in water and to prevent some pollution, because when plants died in water, they will cause the pollution. And yeah, so the last 2 boxes you can see in the right, specially designed for oyster growth and reproduction. Oyster can not only purify the water, but also help form living breakwaters and reduce the impact of flood on Great Island. So this is my master plan of Simpsons Island. As you can see, the mid area of island has the best landscape resource on the island, and the forest is most in this island. So I set up a forest landscape and 3 forest landscape trial and 3 viewing platform here. Each viewing platform can enjoy different landscape experience. To the east of the island is a new dune, a sand dune, with movable wooden walkways running through the north and south of the island to observe and appreciate the ecological sand dune systems. And as you can see in the east corner, there is the feeder beach to reduce the impact from the currents and erosion. Okay, so there is the 2 sections to show how the new islands look like. This is the first one is the section of the west side of the island. It is easy to see that people can move not only on observation platform and wooden walkway, but also on nature walkways around the island without paving. But the nature reserve in the mid of the island was inaccessible. This is just talk about the node. People can do different things at different nodes: fishing, observation island ecosystem, learning, chatting, judging, and working, and something else you want to do. And here is the elevation and analysis I proposed in the new Simpsons Island. And here is the functional application analysis. As you can see, I divided them for 6 areas. It's about the dune tourist trail, and is the red, and the orange is the reactional beach, and the yellow is the reactional fishing area, and the green is the forest sightseeing trail, and the blue one is roundabout working path, and the last one, the purple, is environment education. And this is the trail analysis, because in this island you just can walk by your feet, so there's no bicycle, there's no car, so the trail is the nature list, and I think it's very healthy and interesting way to enjoy the landscape resource in this island. And you can see there's different colors to distinguish the different function of the trail. So the orange is about the forest oxygen trail, and the yellow is the beach sunshine trail, and the light blue is the sand dune work trail, and the blue is the roundabout fitness trail, and the last one, purple, is the environment education trail. Okay, thank you. So let's let Ben to introduce the conclusion for us.
All right. So just a few more things. Just again want to thank our sponsors, Barnstable Clean Water Coalition and the town. And we just want to reinforce that, climate change and sea level rise is an unprecedented issue and is going to require bold new ideas. And some of our visions, we want to emphasize that it's important to be proactive in this issue as opposed to reactive. Some of our strategies have looked at retreat, and this is obviously a very difficult strategy, but is one we explored. We obviously recognize, it's not just Barnstable, not just Massachusetts, and not just the U.S. This is a global issue and is going to require new sources of funding, new policies, new ways of thinking. So, you're not in it alone. There's a lot, there's going to be a lot of action in this area. But again, we explored what retreat means and what could be done with that space that is vacated. And we've also taken this living systems approach. There's so much uncertainty with sea level rise and climate change, and we believe that these living systems are more adaptable to the uncertainty and the complex changes moving forward. And so, again, Cape Cod is an incredible place because of the oceans, because of the beaches, and we want to make sure it stays that way, obviously, but also keep in mind the impacts that the sea level rise and ocean can cause, and how to kind of balance those two issues. So, again, thanks you for bearing with us through all of our proposals, and we certainly invite any questions, comments, feedback, anything you guys have. So again, thank you. It's been a pleasure. And we're going to be providing you guys with a report as a kind of one of our deliverables of all these proposals, and a written narrative to kind of go along with it. So you'll have that coming at some point. Yes, Mark.
let the record show that it would be about 200 to 300 feet long by about 60 feet wide. Sure. Absolutely. Exactly. Ideally, the plants after the root mass had established would hold that sand better, ideally. But if the sand dune were to fail, then that concrete structure would also be there to buffer that surge. Yeah.
Any more questions on Blish Point? If not,
So the harbor, we didn't get into that very much, but it needs some type of treatment, and that's the one place that it really can't leave. The harbor needs to be on the water, of course. So one proposal or one set of ideas that we looked at was more piers and floating buildings to allow for the existing harbor to stay in place. The parking lot will flood. It's already flooding during storm events. So there'd have to be some reconciliation of how to deal with the water coming into the parking lot, but the piers ideally could be retrofitted to deal with sea level rise. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. I'm the professor who like to work with these. And last year we had the pleasure with the Barnstable Clean Water Coalition to work on the Marston's Mills River to look at how green infrastructure might be able to contribute to reducing the nitrogen loading that comes into the three bays. So this year, Z. Crocker suggested that we do this project, and it's, you know, we've been only doing this for 7 weeks, by the way. So they did all this in 7 weeks. And they're starting a new project tomorrow, so good luck to them. But they're young and have a lot of energy. But during these 7 weeks, it's just incredible what has happened in the world, in this country. You know, we've had 2 major hurricanes with maybe unprecedented, but certainly a big deal. And we had the release of the next version of the IPCC report from the United Nations, which is, you know, more bad news, basically worse than anybody had predicted. So it kind of, and just today, Ben told me that Mayor Walsh in Boston kind of endorsed the Boston Resiliency Plan. And what was his quote? That he said, you know, all of this is going to be very expensive, but nothing that we, everything will be less expensive than doing nothing. So, you know, if you think we can put our head in the sand, I don't think we can. I think the good people of Barnstable have seen this recently enough and up close enough to realize that something has to happen. When we started the project, Ben asked the question, you know, he called it the existential question, you know, like, is there a future for this place? Is it gonna wash away? And, you know, this can kind of extend to a lot of the coasts around the country, around the world. Some places are going to wash away. Island nations are going underwater. So it's not just the issue of the day, it's the issue of our times. And it's going to take unimaginable amounts of money and resources to solve this. Barnstable will be part of it. Mark will try to find some revenues here, but the Commonwealth needs to be a part of that, and also the federal government, of course. But it's going to overwhelm everyone. So, you know, sorry, there's not a silver bullet here for how to solve this, but we hope that we've given you something to think about, maybe a different way to think about it. I know that the town is working with, you know, some real scientists with NOAA and kind of state-of-the-art people that are doing this work. And we hope that we've given you some new ideas to think about. We're landscape architects, so of course, we tend to think about landscape solutions, rebuilding sand dunes, restoring salt marshes, building reefs, and that might be a part of the solution. But we want to thank you all for our long presentation this evening. The students have a lot to say. They could talk for more hours than that, but thank you, and we look forward to any comments, any other comments you have tonight or other times. Yes? Yeah, very, very good question. It's, I mean, our federal flood insurance program has been at this for decades. Originally just rebuilding coastal properties that were knocked down by hurricanes. Now, kind of the second generation was to raise not allow construction without raising the structures above the sea level. But that doesn't really address the infrastructure that the public has to maintain for those people to get to the properties. So some of the newer thinking, which kind of came out of Sandy in New York, involved a lot of buyouts by the government. You know, the federal government kind of stepped up and bought out a lot of the properties on the New Jersey shore and Staten Island with, you know, federal funding coming in to ease the hardship. But it's going to be a difficult conversation. And when you think that, you know, we looked at little bits of this town. This one town has 170 miles of coastline, much less. How much is on all of Cape Cod? 1,000 miles? Easily, right? If we have 170, 1,000 miles, you know, how much in the Commonwealth, how much in New England? So clearly, there's never going to be enough money to kind of flat out compensate people for this. So one of the strategies, we worked with a local design firm that's doing some resiliency plans on Long Island in Montauk. And they came up with an interesting concept for transfer of development rights where coastal waterfront hotels could be relocated, you know, 100 yards inland by selling their development rights along the coast. So it's a way for the landowners to get compensated by the process of development. So Elizabeth knows this concept, I'm sure. It requires a hot real estate market and a demand. I think we have that here. It requires an ability by the town to find other places for higher density development, which I think you have. So that's the idea of, you know, the people from Stewart's Creek, X number of homes need to leave, but they are allocated the development rights to those properties can be sold to builders who might build higher density condominiums in town here, and the revenue, some of the revenue for that goes back to pay for the landowners. So, and the town wins by getting people away from the coast and closer to public services, public transportation. So that's one concept. There's other concepts that are being explored called rolling easements, which is a way to kind of phase in this painful economic process over time as the sea level rises, and the easement for the coastal restriction kind of moves inland as the ocean rises. So there's a few tools that are emerging to try to address this really terribly complex problem that is really fraught with a lot of potential for inequity and real hardship on folks. No question about that. Yeah.
To avoid that discussion, which is controversial, the idea of retreat and is there a way that the strategies could be bifurcated in the meantime? In other words, can you employ some of your landscape techniques to slow down maybe the process while you work through the controversial part of it as to getting people to retreat?
Yes, I think, you know, for the sake of this exercise, for 7 weeks, we kind of picked one option, and frankly, it's more interesting for us. We're not being glib or insensitive to the town, but it allows the students the opportunity to say, oh, now we have some space, we could do it right. We could act, but in reality, of course, it would be phased, it would be incremental, it would be experimental, so that some of these ideas could be piloted and tested and monitored. But, you know, unfortunately, the writing's on the wall with the sea level rise and the storm. You saw all the visualizations. It really does come to a point where it's not going to be feasible. So we can delay that, you know, and there's ways to, if, you know, ironically, the least painful way might be to, you know, to bite the bullet and do it in a planned, deliberate way, rather than in an emergency crisis response, when there's hundreds of people homeless and, you know, homes destroyed by a big storm. You know, now there's a real crisis for the town with maybe more money, more cost at that point. So,
Could some of the landscape ideas be built offshore?
yes. I mean, they're, as we speak, they're starting to do some of this off of New York City. There was a very interesting program done by the Department of Housing and Urban Development called Rebuild by Design. They had a design competition with international experts to say, we need out-of-the-box ideas. They gave them out-of-the-box ideas. Some of those ideas are now being funded and actually being built. I think there's a few $1 billion for new projects around New York City that's actually in the pipeline for construction. So, and it includes some of these offshore ideas. You know, they're not perfect. It's not the silver bullet to solve the problem, but they can mitigate the energy of the waves and thereby reduce. Yeah. Well, it also reduces the punch of the storms, if and when they come. Yep. Thanks, everybody. You guys have
Good.
a long drive back. Good. Yeah, and thanks. You know, you should know that this was all made possible by the Barnstable Clean Water Coalition that gave us a grant that made this happen. Elizabeth.
I just want to say thank you. I was really overwhelmed by the professionalism of both your product in 7 weeks and the presentations that you all made tonight. I think, you know, if we can leave with a moment of hope, the fact that we have a new generation studying and looking at this issue, I think is a really
Good.
Thank you for taking the time to be here.
Okay. Thank you very much.